Join me in the audio garden to cultivate our collective wisdom, nurture creativity, and spread love. My name is Martha Senator. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard. We will be listening, yes, to the birds of spring. We'll feel the bend toward longer days, tip with the equinox, admire the blooming phlox. Let's listen. Let's listen to the stories here in the audio garden. Let's listen to how they make us feel. Let's let our feelings be heard by our hearts and minds. Let's read everything and leave nothing unsaid, uncovered, unremembered, unheard by the loudest and the humblest, and the irritatingly truthful among us. Okay, I'm getting carried away like I always do when I see blue wood lilies, daffodils dotting the hills. Oops, okay. It's Herstory Month and is Banned Book Week, they say too. But here during the Listen and Be Heard hour for readers and writers, we always talk about all that and more. A little later, we'll hear from my fellow Greenvillian, James Cruell, what he thinks about banning books, and about an ancestress, the Queen of the Kingdom of the Happy Land, from the author of The American Queen, Vanessa Miller. But right now, my co-host, Tony Robles, is holding a workshop right here in the audio garden with his special guest, Shizue Seigel. They're already deep in conversation about craft, and Shizue is about to read, so let's get on over there.
Bachan's house. My Bachan, Japanese for grandma, runs a hotel south of the canal. It's a cheap SRO in the middle of the block between the pool hall and the Jesus Mission, where the open door reveals rows of stoic men slumped in folding chairs, pretending to listen to the preacher and waiting for a chance to sleep in one of the iron beds lined up like soldiers with white sheets pulled drum tight. My mom parks our two-tone blue Pontiac outside the liquor store, stocked with golden pints of brandy, port, and muscatel. She checks her lipstick in the rearview mirror. She makes sure her stocking seams are straight, and my ponytail is so tight it makes my scalp ache. She makes a beeline down the vomit-spattered street to Bachan's hotel, past the broken men in broken shoes, in pants tied up with rope. She does not look at the army green trouser leg, neatly folded, safety pinned, and dangling slackly where limbs should be. She's blind to the gap-toothed yellowing ivories, the gray stubble lined with spittle, the passed-out drunk lying twisted on the ground just as he fell, wreathed in the sweet, stale fumes of cheap wine. Single rooms, daily, weekly, monthly, reads the sign on Bachan's hotel. The door is checked and chalky with age, and the entrance reeks of piss. Don't touch the walls, my mom says. She gathers her skirts tightly so they will not brush the stamped metal wainscoting, painted institutional green and stained with grease from many hands. Bachan is waiting for us at the top of the stairs, at the end of a long hall lined with bleak single rooms. A tiny woman, skinny as the broom she wields, as crooked as the teeth jammed any which way into her mouth. "Yokata ne," she says when she sees us. "Isn't it good?" "Namam Dab, I pay homage to the Buddha," she says. And as she beams, "It is good. all of it. The 10 kids she raised in the Skid Row hotel, the drunks, the deadbeats, the bums who call her mama and eat her free Sunday chili, a nervous mother, a little girl with eyes like cameras. Nothing escapes the embrace of Bachan's compassionate view. So that was the original poem. And I sort of expanded the end of it. I added a section on the end to make it a little bit more of a story arc. As Bachan and I walk to the store, a stubble-faced man blocks our path. "Hey, Mrs., how's it going?" he bellows. "Ah, Bronson, Mr. Brown, long time no see." She chuckles and bows and then peers deeply into his eyes. "How you doing? Okay?" The man shrugs. "Well, you know." He ducks his head and squints at her hopefully. "I'm trying, right?" Bachan pats his arm. "You good man. Remember that? You be okay." The man nods, and then he notices me peeping from behind Bachan's purse. He begins to rummage frantically through his pockets. Does he have a gun, I wonder? Is he going to rob us? Wait, I got it. He pulls out a butterscotch candy from a sweat-stained pocket and holds it out to me. My knees lock in resistance as Bachan gently pushes me towards the man. "Aren't you a little cutie?" the man says, bending down and wreathing me in the sickly sweet aroma of stale muscatel. I look at the candy. The wrapper is crushed and covered with pocket lint. "Don't touch, it's got germs," Mom would have said. But she's not here. I look up at Bachan. Take it, she urges. "Say thank you." "Thank you." I take the candy with the tips of my fingers, careful not to touch the man's hand. The man's red-rimmed eyes well up. He straightens up and says to Bachan, "You know, my little girl was about that age." Bachan holds his gaze for a long moment. "Sorry, I so sorry. You good man," she says, and bows to him. Mom would have made me throw out the candy, but I unwrap the treat and stick it in my mouth. It's so old, my teeth sink through a layer of gummy softness before hitting the clean crunch of butterscotch. I savor the sweetness as I follow Bachan down the street. So I sort of am of the opposite take on things as Girardi in terms of exposition. I sort of go towards the Japanese model of saying little, but thinking about what I'm conveying and sort of, asking the reader to fill in the blanks. So sometimes I do have exposition, and I'll read another piece a little bit later on that has more detail of exposition. But I think that this, it's actually, I find that it's good to, if you're working on long form stuff, it's good to still participate in readings and have to do something that's only, 3 minutes or 5 minutes long, and see if your long form stuff, if you can find something that makes sense in a short period of time. I find that that's really helpful in sort of sharpening and clarifying writing. Anyway, so I think this piece sort of speaks to your question, Tony, about memory. I started out my writing by writing down a few incidents that just stuck in my mind. And sometimes I didn't even know why they stuck in my mind, but somehow in the writing of them, I began to see that they had a point. And then after I had 5 or 6 of them, I went, these all have to do with how my family dealt with the incarceration and with prejudice and discrimination. Too young to know. When I was 6, I was too young to know that segregation meant a California sharecropping camp of tar paper shacks, a step up from concentration camp barracks for Japanese American families like mine, a step up from a Dust Bowl tent for the one white family in the compound that kept to themselves. On the other side of the country, segregation meant an all-white Irish and Polish American neighborhood across town from where Freddie Gray would later die, decades later. They ate fish on Fridays, reminded themselves every Easter why they hated Jews, and beat you up for wearing orange on St. Patrick's Day. When I was 6, I didn't know where Asian Americans should sit on a Baltimore bus. White faces in front, mahogany in back, us in the middle. Or what the park map meant by white pool and colored pool. My child's mind imagined 2 pools with fountains lit up at night. The colored pool would be better. Red, yellow, and blue and green lights, not just plain white. When I was 6, I didn't know that America was a celebration of carnivores, meatloaf, steak, and liver and onions, fresh shucked oysters eaten alive with horseradish and ketchup, soft-shell crabs fried in butter and slapped between 2 slices of Wonder Bread. Our German landlady boiled blue crabs alive in beer at Old Bay. When they tried to get out, she pushed them back in with a wooden spoon and clapped on the lid. When she learned that the nice tenants upstairs had changed their name from Rosenberg to Ross, she made them move so her residence could remain pristine, German, Italian, and Japanese American. When I was 6, I didn't know what America was.
This is the Listen and Be Heard hour for readers and writers, and we're listening to Shizue Seigel, a third-generation Japanese-American writer, visual artist, and community activist who explores complex intersections of history, culture, and spirituality through prose, poetry, and visual art. Her work is informed by 7 decades of experiential explorations across age, class, continents, and cultures. Shizue was born in 1946, just after her family's release from World War II incarceration. She grew up as an army brat in segregated Baltimore, occupied Japan, California farm labor camps, and Skid Row, Stockton, before finding home in San Francisco.
And what I tried to do here was sort of contrast the sort of a child's voice with some pretty serious things and show how the installation of prejudice happens really early.
Oh, yeah.
Kids, that our cafeteria, Baltimore is a Catholic town, and Maryland was founded by the Catholic Calverts. And, in the 50s, they did not serve, they served fish on Fridays in the school cafeterias. This whole thing about fish on Fridays and every Easter they reminded themselves why they hated the Jews because they killed Christ. The whole St. Patrick's Day is green, and you better not wear orange, and nobody explained why you shouldn't wear orange, but all the green people hated the orange people, that's for sure. So it's sort of trying to speak to how early those things are laid in and how innocent they may seem. If you're not one of the targeted groups, then you could think all of this is just in fun. But it's not. And then the whole thing about the food, it didn't start out that way. Just as I began, I remember her throwing the crabs in and pushing them down. And I remember the almost sadistic glee with which she fed us soft-shell crab for the first time. And sort of almost dared us to pick it up and eat it. But then when I was putting it together, I went, wow, this whole thing, it's like a celebration of violence. This is the normalization of violence and the that it's okay to mistreat living beings for your own entertainment. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, but so this has got a lot more sort of political content, kind of very condensed, whereas this next piece is going back to the long form narrative again. It's set in the strawberry sharecropping camp where my grandparents lived when they first got out of the camps. Work boots and chairs scraped in the kitchen, so I knew that Bachan and Jichan, Grandma and Grandpa, were already up. And this is a different Bachan than the Skid Row Hotel Bachan. This is my farming Bachan. Bachan means grandma. Then Mommy got up from the sagging metal cot we shared in the front room. I nestled into the warm hollow she'd left behind until my bursting bladder forced me upright into the frigid air. I forced sockless feet into shoes, threw my coat over my pajamas, and raced out to the two-hole outhouse. By the time I got back in the kitchen, the blue enamel kerosene heater was warming up the kitchen. Mommy had tied her hair in a kerchief with a "we can do it" knot in front and applied her cherry red lipstick. She served last night's leftover rice with fried eggs and Spam, while Bachan Aki yelled at my 17-year-old uncle, Ray. "Raimundo, okine nasai! Osoku natta ya! Get up now! It's getting late." She grabbed the broom and whacked his backside with the flat of the bristles. My step-grandfather drained his coffee cup with a smack of satisfaction, shrugged on his denim work jacket, and clapped on his sweat-stained fedora. As he headed out the door, I called, "Jichan, wait for me." To me, Jichan felt like a real grandpa. To my mom, he was just the old man we had to live with, the foreman the FBI arrested after Pearl Harbor. After the war, they let everyone out of the camps, but the family farm was gone. Nobody had any place to go but the sharecroppers' camp, a ring of tar paper shacks on the edge of the strawberry fields, all occupied by Japanese Americans struggling to get back on their feet. Once outside, Jichan rolled himself a smoke out of a Bull Durham pouch, and I pretend puffed clouds of steam from an imaginary cigarette. The frosty ground crunched beneath my feet as I trotted beside Jichan. Morning mist rose off the fields, and we savored the stillness until birds roosting in the sycamores beside the creek began their early morning chatter. Soon they rose in a great wheeling cloud and circled overhead before beginning their daily hunt for bugs and worms. Jichan chuckled. "Mita, minna shigigoto ni ikiru. Torimo. Look at that. Everyone has to go to work, even the birds." When I was first learning how to write, I often started with setting, and the more I wrote, the details of the set, as I tried to remember the details of the setting, I would remember more and more, not only about what it looked like, but who was there, what it sounded like, and then, the whole thing about exercises with setting is, you have to bring in your other senses, because I'm primarily a visual person, but, what did it smell like? What did it sound like? Who else was there? What could you remember about their personalities or the tone of their voice? Or so a setting is oftentimes a really great place to get into a story. And then you get into, there's the narrative, there's the exposition of close narrative, building a story, building a scene, bringing people into a scene, and then moving the characters through the scene. But then, I'm interested in social justice and in Japanese American history and its relationship with the history of other Americans of various backgrounds. And so it sort of expands into showing the relationship within, the story of what were the characters' relationship with the natural world and how were they impacted by the social, political environment around them. A lot of cultures that live close to the earth, that are not too many generations removed from being close to the earth, living at a level that one might call poverty, but others would call just enough, because we live in a society that is way, way too much, way too wasteful, way too careless. And I find that sense of the recognition of our kinship as people and our interrelationship with the earth, and with the continuity of life. It's sort of like the Western, especially Northern European tradition is sort of very black and white, night and day, good and bad, and we're all striving to get better. And I think a lot of more indigenous societies are more about life is cyclical. Or like if it is progress, it's like a helix. It's a spiral. So I think, I grew up with the kind of Buddhism that we didn't talk about it, but we believed in reincarnation. You could go to nirvana after you died, but if you still had stuff that you had to work out, you would come back. Whereas it's sort of like the whole Christian thing of you die and you either go to heaven or you go to hell. And it's sort of very black and white and kind of desperate, and it's I grew up with this a much more relaxed way of seeing things. And I kind of see that, it's kind of fascinating that when I travel to Mexico or India or Nepal or Bali, I feel that same sort of connection a lot of times. And the same thing with Filipinos. I don't know. There's just something Filipinos and African Americans. There's just this sort of heart to heart connection. You see somebody in the street, you look each other in the eye, you recognize each other as human beings, and you greet each other with a nod of respect. And it's almost like a universal thing. And I think that we need to go back to that. We have sort of been scared into being separated from each other and judging each other and thinking one group is better or worse than another. And I kind of feel like, Buddhism teaches us to live in the here and now and be with what is, not what we want it to be, or what we regret that it was, but just be here in the moment. And we get to create whatever we want in that moment. We bring stuff from our minds into that moment. Buddhism teaches that suffering is created by our mind and how what we project onto the world. It's not the world is neutral. So that's actually the whole gist of my book. It's called The Tiger and the Cliff. And the main story that's in it is a Buddhist parable about going on a journey, and then the road gets rockier, and then you notice there are bandits, and then you notice there are tigers, lurking, and you start to get scared and you walk faster, and then you start running and the tigers are chasing you. You come to the edge of a cliff. Oh my God, what are you going to do? And there's two versions of this story. The Zen version it happens to a monk, and the monk leaps over the cliff, and then on the way down, and there's tigers below and jagged rocks. On the way down, he grabs a branch and he's clinging onto the branch, and the tigers are up there, the tigers are down there, and he sees, and there are black and white mice nibbling at the roots of this branch, And then he sees a strawberry, and he plucks the strawberry and eats it. It's the most delicious strawberry he's ever had. So that's the Zen version of the story. The version that I heard from my mother, that she heard in Poston incarceration camp, which, by the way, is on an Indian reservation. Anyway, she and many other people really got into religion at that time to try to make sense of their lives. You know, why did they get ripped out from their comfortable lives and sent to this, in this case, burning desert in the middle of nowhere? And she heard a story about the tiger on the cliff, but what happened was the person was an ordinary person, and they leapt off the cliff. And as they left, they said, Namandab, 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 because in Jodo Shinshu, which is a sort of a folk-based Buddhist tradition that was founded in the 1100s by a failed monk who meditated for 20 years and he wasn't getting it. He said, "Oh, I'm just like, I give up. I'm a stubble-headed fool. I'm going to let my shaved head grow out and just, I give up." Anyway, and it was he found a master that told him, you know, if you just give gratitude to the Buddha from the bottom of your heart 3 times, from the root of your being, if you can really feel grateful, you're saved. So this version of the story, you jump off the cliff, you don't know what's happening, you say, I entrust myself to the Buddha 3 times. And then where you land is where you land. You could crash onto the rocks, you could get eaten by tigers, or a breeze could waft you along into a briar bush or onto a nice soft bed of grass. You don't know. But the whole point is to entrust. My book is all about the various tigers and bandits that chased my relatives and how they dealt with it.
You don't know. Shizue Seigel. You can go to ShizueSeigel.com to learn much more about her writing, her amazing looking visual art that I have been looking at all of that at ShizueSeigel.com. And I also learned that she's a college dropout who learned by doing. That's what she says on her website. From the Haight Ashbury to Indian ashrams, from the corporate advertising to HIV prevention, to San Francisco's vibrant activist arts community. Shizue is the founder and director of Right Now San Francisco Bay, which supports San Francisco Bay Area writers and artists of color through workshops, events, and anthologies. And you can find out more information about that at rightnowsf.com. And I'm also going to talk a little more about some of those publications at the end of the show. Coming up, we're still going to hear from Vanessa Miller in conversation with Tony Robles, and also a little bit about banning books. And at the very end of the show, I'm going to play a little teaser for you from Joan Gelfand speaking about her time in Berkeley in the 1970s. Stay tuned for station identification, and we'll be right back with the Listen and Be Heard Hour for writers and readers. This is Listen and Be Heard Radio, WLBH.org. Welcome to the Audio Garden. Let's cultivate our collective wisdom, nurture creativity, and spread love.
The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison.
Once it's heard, it can't be unheard. Once it's published, it's not going to be unpublished. Once you read the poem, you can't unread it. No matter how an individual may try to push it to the side, forget about it, it's still in there. And it's the words, the meaning, the feelings behind it are taking root in their psyche, and they can't get rid of it.
By Sarah James. This book is gay by Juno Dawson.
Hi, my name is James Cruell, here in Greenville, South Carolina. Concerning the books, I don't understand what's the meaning of taking the books away out of libraries. It's all history. You can't erase history. The book has already been written. If you take it out of the library, that don't mean that you can stop someone from getting knowledge about that book. So I don't see the purpose of taking it out of school. I think it's more political than anything. And I think it's sending a bad message to the kids, you know, and no matter what race they is, I think it's just you denying them a right to know about history. You know, I don't know where we get off pick and choosing what we want to be taught. I can see if it was something that's causing life or death. It's not. It's history. You can't erase that. Just because you had one person say something that they don't agree with, I don't think that should be for the whole society. If you take the book off the shelf, how can you teach it? You're really not going to stop them, because if they really want to know about that book, any author that's written a book, all they got to do is go online or research it, Google it. So you're not stopping it. I think it's a bad motivation to kids. I really do.
PEN America reported while the movement to ban books is driven by a vocal minority demanding censorship, a 2022 poll conducted by the American Library Association found that over 70% of parents oppose book banning, leaving many public school districts in a bind. We want to hear from you to contribute to our banned book segment here on Listen and Be Heard. You can use your voice memo app on your smartphone and record a short message. Introduce yourself, just your first name. Hi, my name is... Record no more than 2 to 3 minutes. Hold the phone about an inch or so away from your chin and find a quiet place to make that recording. Email it to us at bbooks@listenandbeheard.net. bbooks@listenandbeheard.net by hitting that share button in the app. All these instructions we'll also have at listenandbeheard.net. And when you submit that recording, please share with us your name if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, and also that you give permission for Listen and Be Heard to include your voice in the radio show and in the podcast. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeannie, my associate producer here at the Listen and Be Heard Hour for readers and writers. And thank you to James Cruell, an independent all-around house and yard man, great-grandfather, and longtime Greenville, South Carolina resident, for sharing how you feel about banning books. We're going to go back to Toni Robles now, who invited Vanessa Miller to join us here in the audio garden to talk about her book, The American Queen.
All right, this is Toni Robles with Listen and Be Heard Radio. We are speaking with Vanessa Miller, and she is the author of the brand new book called The American Queen. Vanessa, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Can you tell us about the American Queen? Tell us about that.
Absolutely. I say The American Queen is my love letter to history. It is based on a true story that there once was a queen in America, and this happened right after emancipation. The formerly enslaved people, they left their plantation in Mississippi, and they traveled through Alabama, through Georgia, South Carolina to find their promised land in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. And they called it the Kingdom of the Happy Land.
Yes, yes. I know that the Kingdom of the Happy Land is one of those stories that, it's kind of like hidden history.
It is.
What should people know about the Kingdom of the Happy? Well, first of all, where geographically does that extend?
Well, I try and tell people it's about 20 miles outside of Hendersonville. That's the best directions I can give. I'm kind of directionally challenged, but it's about 20 miles outside of where we are right now. And you ride up further up into the mountains, and it is just a beautiful place. I was able to walk on this land, and it was just amazing to me to see this place where people once lived, and they built this community and built what they called a kingdom. And so I loved everything about writing this book.
We're going back to 1869, and obviously that deals with history and research. So this is like, I guess, historical fiction.
Yes.
You've written other novels as well.
Absolutely. 54.
Have they been kind of historical fiction as well?
No, I'm more of a contemporary writer. This story kind of fell in my lap when another author, her name is Lisa Wingate, she gave me an endorsement on one of my books, which is titled Something Good. I went back to thank her for doing that. And then she tells me about a Facebook friend told her about the Kingdom of the Happy Land people. And she said, Vanessa, you live in North Carolina. You might want to research this. And I began to research it and fell in love with the story. And I thank her every day for just even mentioning it to me.
I'm assuming that the research, I guess you would go into archives. Was there a lot of oral history? Did you speak with families?
I did not speak with family members or descendants, but what I did was read one of the books that was written on the Kingdom of the Happy Land people, which you can find right here at the Henderson Library, and is titled The Kingdom of the Happy Land. Sadie Patton Smathers was a local historian here, and she interviewed descendants of the Kingdom of the Happy Land. And so it was, a great joy to find that book because I was able to find so many names of people who had actually lived on the kingdom.
I don't want to give too much of a spoiler, but if you could just maybe give just a short synopsis of the plot, or just a snippet of what it's about.
Well, it's about Luella Bobo Montgomery. It's about her moving from hate and learning to appreciate life, love, and the community that she becomes a part of. And so that's really, in a nutshell, what this is about. It's really about people giving of themselves for each other. They built a community that was based on all for one and one for all. And so that tells you that they wanted to be people who looked out for each other.
So life, love, and community, and being kind of self-sufficient in kind of a communal way, but also in a spiritual way as well.
Absolutely.
So you were practicing eldership. If you could call it that. Again, this is WPVM, Listen and Be Heard Radio. This is Tony Robles speaking with author Vanessa Miller, author of The American Queen. Vanessa, thank you so much for talking to us at Listen and Be Heard. For those of our listeners that want to get your book and find out more about you and your work, how can they do that?
Well, The American Queen is available wherever books are sold. If they want to check out their local indie bookstore, grab a copy there. It's available on Amazon. It's available in most Barnes and Nobles. Wherever books are sold, they can grab a copy.
I can't wait to read it myself. And finally, just final remarks. Do you have any shout outs for anyone in particular?
Well, my husband. Hello, David.
One thing before we end, all of us writers have to work with editors, and we make choices, and sometimes there's tension and conflict between what we want and what the editor sees fit. What was that like for you? Was it a good experience working with your editor?
I personally love working with my editor. I think writers, we come out with one idea, but editors are useful to writers because they help you to turn your product into you may turn in a really good product, but when you work with your editor, it can become a great product if you're willing to listen and take in the advice, because they have a certain skill set. A writer has one skill set, but an editor is an editor for a reason.
Yes.
They can look at the book and find the holes in it. And so I love working with my editors. They help me a great deal.
I guess they call it substantive editing, right?
Yeah. And it works.
Yeah. Well, it looks like Sadika Johnson had some really good words for it. Said that the American Queen brings to light another hidden triumph in Black American history. Again, thank you so much for being with us on Listen and Be Heard Radio. Again, Vanessa Miller, the American Queen. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Tony Robles, for sharing that interview with Vanessa Miller, a best-selling author, playwright, and motivational speaker. You can find out more about her and her book, The American Queen, at VanessaMiller.com, as well as her more than 50 Christian books of fiction and poetry. And at ShizueSeigel.com, as I mentioned, you will find an extensive list of publications of anthologies by Bay Area writers, all from this organization, Right Now, as in WRITE, Right Now, SF Bay. They support San Francisco Bay Area writers and artists of color through workshops, events, and anthologies, which I think is an important way to support writers. So I salute Shizue for that and her, decades-long effort to assemble these anthologies. And it's really something to admire and appreciate, and let her know that, and check these anthologies out. It's a great way, I think, when you read anthologies, to be introduced to a variety of writers, and when it's brought together by an editor who appreciates the depth of the literary scene of where they live, that's invaluable to somebody who wants to come in and, read the best right off the bat. So some of the titles: Uncommon Ground, Essential Truths, Civil Liberties, Endangered Species, Standing Strong, In Good Conscience, My First 100 Years, and Distillations. And in addition, and so all of those you can find out more at rightnowsf.com. But at ShizueSeigel.com, in addition to that, you can look at her selected writings and her really gorgeous visual art. What can I say? So thank you very much for joining us in the audio garden, Shizue Seigel, and Vanessa Miller. And next week, I wanted to give you a little taste of what's coming up next week by letting you hear this little bit bits of wisdom from Joan Gelfand, the author of Outside Voices.
So second wave feminism was a celebration first of the 50 years, marking 50 years of voting rights. But then we said, not we, people like Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, Betty Friedan, the people who were on the front line, said, now it's time to move women forward. We want 24/7 childcare, abortion and reproductive rights nationwide, and we want equal pay for equal work. Well, as you know, we did get abortion legalized nationwide in the early 70s. We never did get childcare paid for, and we are working on equal pay for equal work. So, but think back to the middle of the century. Women were programmed by, the culture to be competitive with each other, as beautiful as they could be. The beauty standards were ridiculous. Well, they still are, but they were really bad in the 50s. And so I grew up in a household that was not very supportive, woman to woman, meaning I didn't get love, encouragement, and support from my mother and sister. And when I arrived in Berkeley, I was like, oh my God, there are women who are actually supportive and encouraging of other women, that they actually want you to succeed. And that's, as I say in the book, that's where I found my voice. That's where I allowed myself to have a voice. As a young, idealistic person, I thought going to Israel would be a wonderful lifestyle, because at my heart, I really believed in socialism. And the kibbutz was a socialist experiment. But when I got to Israel and I saw that the embedded racism from the European Jews, the ones who were in leadership, the German, Austrian, European Jews against the darker Jews, I was so devastated, because to me that was such a beautiful opportunity to get rid of institutionalized racism, right? If you have a Moroccan Jew who's dark-skinned, that's a beautiful thing.
We're all beautiful, unique, and special. Thank you for that, Joan. Joan Gelfand, author of Outside Voices, a memoir of the Berkeley Revolution. I'll be speaking with her, another of our elders in this month of celebrating history, next week. So please do come back to listen for that conversation. I also spoke with Latasha Diggs, the author of a book of poems called Village, and that interview will be coming up in the next few weeks as well. We've shared a lot of things today, a lot to think about, a lot to feel and digest, but I would like to still share one more story with you about one more queen, an ancient queen of Brittany. She was Queen Boedicea.
Boedicea was bad. She couldn't be any other way, because everyone she knew was tough and terrible. You wouldn't want to cross any of them, or your skull might wind up hanging around the neck of their favorite battle horse. But if you didn't cross her, Boedicea was a gasser. She'd drink you under the table and then carry you home, which really turned the king on. And he turned her on, too. So they did it right, and soon there were a couple of princesses keeping the palace up during the wee hours of the night. They kept on digging each other, and the princesses ripened like sweet peaches. But one day, the king woke up and he wasn't feeling so good, and the next day, he was dead. Now, Boadicea was broke up a bit, but she didn't break apart. The king had arranged for half his loot to go to Nero because he figured if he didn't, Nero would take it anyway. The other half he left to the light of his life. So Boadicea figured she was the ruling queen now and she could live with that. But there was a real hang-up Boadicea didn't know anything about. Nero wasn't feeling so agreeable the day he read the king's will, you see, so he sent some slick soldiers to take everything. Even the princess's cherries. And they did. And while they were at it, they whipped Boadicea out in the square where everyone could get a good look at what was going on. Now, Boadicea, she wasn't one to cry or take anything laying down. And Nero, he never thought a woman would do anything but cry and lie down. Boadicea, she figured she had nothing left to lose. The time had come to kick ass, especially since everyone as far as she could walk in any direction was as salty with Nero as she was. So she got them all together in one place and started rapping to them. Everyone who knocked their ears to her speech started remembering all the little things and the big things that the Romans had laid on them too. Soon they were all seeing red. Now all the Romans around were living in the same town, and if they could have heard the way Boadicea was carrying on, they would have split without packing any bags. They never knew what hit them. When Boadicea and her crew were through, there was nothing left but a few inches of superheated charcoal, which is still there today if you want to go looking for it. Well, when word got back to Nero, he sent his right-hand muscle man, a stud named Silenius, to straighten everything out. So Silenius comes along a couple months later with a couple hundred men, and when he gets a look at Boadicea and her hordes, and all the mamas and kiddies camped out picnicking like war is nothing but a great big show, well, he turned around and let them burn down the next town, like they did the last one, without even warning the Roman settlers what was coming around. Boadicea hung a few more skulls around the neck of her horse, and Silenius sent word back to Nero that he needed a few more men in order to handle the situation correctly. So Boadicea keeps carrying on, riding her chariot across the Brittany landscape, removing Romans and thinking that Nero wasn't all he'd been cracked up to be. And he wasn't. But his soldiers were tougher than he was, and they didn't come with their families, and they had sharper swords than Boadicea would ever lay her hands on. So when enough of these bad boys got together, they went to break up the picnic. And it didn't take them very long either. When Boadicea saw the situation, she finished herself and her daughters off before anyone else could. Boadicea was bad. She couldn't be any other way.
This is the Listen and Be Heard Hour for readers and writers. I'm Martha Senator. I want to thank Davian Dial for introducing Listen and Be Heard to the broadcast airwaves at WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina. We are also heard on KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and WLBH.org in Greenville, South Carolina, and around the world. Thank you to DJ Jeannie Hopper, my associate producer, J. Rodriguez Sierra, who provides background music and loops, and you can learn more about him at jrodriguezsierra.com. Jeremiah Cothran does editing for us. Yvette Murray is the voice in the banned books segment of our show. Tony Robles is my co-host and a contributor. Living It is produced by DJ Jeannie Hopper and Sabina Wertman. released on Liquid Sound Lounge Records and the CD Living It. My name is Martha Senator, and I want to thank you for listening and for the opportunity to be heard.
Living it, giving it, having it, taking it, moving it, shaking it, creating it, loving it. Living it is loving it. Living it is sewing a coat, investing each stitch with magic, creating a unique design, putting it on and wearing it the rest of your life. Living it is knowing that what you see, what you hear is tangible. It's being a rock in the river and being the river too. It's hearing, you'll never be able to do that. Living it is knowing you will do it. It's speaking the unspoken. It's thinking the unthinkable. It's doing the unexpected. It's quitting before you get fired. Living it is giving it is having it is taking it is moving it, shaking it, creating it, loving it. Living it is loving it. Living it is loving a man you're not supposed to love. It's giving way to emotions, creating commotions, calling attention to yourself, and eye contact. Living it is learning from someone who can actually show you. It's cleaning your teacher's house or helping her to find one. It's never ever saying J-O-B. Living it is a one-way ticket and no solid plans. It's smoking a J in a smoke cafe in Amsterdam. It's saying the day is pretty in a strange new city. Living it is giving it. Giving it is having it is taking it is moving it, shaking it, creating it, loving it. Living it is having nothing to lose and